She wakes up on a quiet Saturday morning in a beautiful apartment. Everything looks right. The coffee machine on the counter is expensive. The skincare lined up in the bathroom looks clean, intentional, almost luxurious. Her closet is curated. Neutral tones, good fabric. Pieces that say she has taste. Her salary sounds respectable on paper. Her Instagram looks calm, soft, put together. From the outside, she looks like a woman who's doing well. And maybe that is why nobody would notice what happens next. Her phone lights up. Not a crisis, not a disaster, just a number, a reminder, a payment, a balance, a quiet little interruption, but her chest tightens anyway, not because she is broke. That is what makes this story harder to see. She is earning, she is functioning, she is paying for her life, but somehow she is never becoming secure, and there is a difference. Because a woman can look financially fine for a very long time, while privately feeling like one wrong month could expose everything. She is not reckless. She does not blow money carelessly. She is not irresponsible. She is not some extreme version of bad decisions people love to warn you about. She is actually what most people would call normal. And that is what makes this dangerous. Because when a woman looks disciplined enough, polished enough, successful enough, nobody questions whether her money is building freedom or just maintaining an image of stability. Now somewhere else there is another woman. Her life is less flashy, less urgent, less impressive online. There is nothing dramatic about her, no constant upgrades, no pressure to look like she has arrived, no performance of success. Her life almost looks boring. But 5 years from now, one of these women will be asking a question in private that she never thought she would need to ask. Where did all my money go? And the other will be sitting in something far more valuable than appearances, options, the option to leave, the option to pause. Option to recover. The option to say no. The option to not panic every time life shifts. So the real question is not which woman looks more successful today. The real question is this: what does the boring woman know that the polished woman does not? Because in 2026, serious money may not come from the habits that look ambitious. It may come from the habits that look forgettable. Most women were not taught to recognize financial success by what they feel. They were taught to recognize it by what they can see. A nicer car, a prettier space, a softer life, a more upgraded version of self, something you can point to, something you can show, something that quietly tells the world, I'm doing well. And over time, that becomes the standard. If your life looks elevated, you must be progressing. If your environment feels upgraded, you must be winning. But real financial strength does not always show up that way in the beginning. In fact, it often looks emotionally underwhelming. And that is the conflict. Because the habits that actually create wealth rarely give you anything to feel proud of in the moment. They do not impress people quickly. They do not translate into a visible personality. They do not give you something to post, celebrate, or explain. They feel repetitive, quiet, almost invisible. And the problem is not that these habits are hard. The problem is that they do not feel rewarding enough to keep doing. Because the brain does not chase what is logical. It chases what feels good now. We are naturally drawn to progress we can see, share, and feel immediately. A purchase feels like movement. An upgrade feels like growth. A visible change feels like proof that something is working. But wealth does not always grow in ways that feel like progress in real time. Sometimes it grows in ways that feel like nothing is happening at all, and that creates tension. Because a woman can be doing the right things financially. But if those things do not feel emotionally satisfying, she slowly drifts back to what does. Not because she lacks discipline, not because she is careless, but because she was conditioned to respect visible progress more than invisible progress, to trust what she can show more than what she is building quietly. And that is where the disconnect begins. Because when your definition of progress is visual, you can be making more money every year and still never feel safer. And that is why some women keep increasing their income without ever increasing their peace. Here is the part that is easy to miss. The women who build serious money are often not doing more exciting things. They are doing more boring things, more consistently. Not because boring is magical, not because repetition is glamorous, and not because wealthy women secretly enjoy denying themselves, but because boring behaviors do 3 things that emotional money habits cannot do for long. They reduce leakage, they increase margin, and they give compounding enough time to actually matter. That is the difference. Because wealth is usually not destroyed by one dramatic mistake. It is rarely one catastrophic decision, rarely one huge shopping spree, rarely one moment so obvious that everybody can point to it and say, that is where it all went wrong. Most of the time, wealth is weakened much more quietly than that. It gets worn down by repeated emotional decisions that look harmless in isolation, A subscription here, a convenience there, a slightly more expensive lifestyle because you are earning more now. Impulse spending that feels like self-expression. Avoiding your real numbers because you do not want your mood to change. Needing every paycheck to feel rewarding instead of strategic. None of these things look dangerous on their own. That is why they work. That is why they keep happening. Because what quietly drains a woman financially is often not what looks irresponsible, it is what looks normal. And this matters because the gap between appearance and stability is very real. Bankrate found that 60% of Americans are uncomfortable with their emergency savings, and only 46% have enough savings to cover 3 months of expenses. The Federal Reserve also found that 63% of adults could cover a $400 emergency with cash or its equivalent, which means a very large number of people are still one modest disruption away from stress. So this is not some rare problem. This is not just about women who do too much. This is what happens when a life looks fine from the outside, but has very little room underneath it. And that is why this conversation matters. Because this is not a video about becoming cheap. It is not about making your life smaller. It is not about becoming fearful around money. It is not about punishing yourself for wanting beautiful things. It is about becoming hard to destabilize, hard to shake, hard to pressure, hard to panic, hard to collapse every time life gets expensive, uncertain, or slow. Because a woman changes financially the moment she stops asking, how do I make my money feel good this month? And starts asking, how do I make my life safer 5 years from now? That is when wealth stops being a performance and starts becoming power. So before we go any further, there is a frame you need to see. Because underneath almost every financial decision, there are usually 2 versions of behavior happening, 2 different questions, 2 different emotional patterns, 2 different women being built in real time. One version asks, how can I feel better with money right now? How can I reduce stress quickly? How can I reward myself? How can I make this month feel softer, prettier, easier to carry? The other version asks, how can I make future me harder to shake? How can I make her less fragile? How can I give her more room, more options, more stability, more power? And that is the real divide, because the first version buys relief. The second version builds resilience. One creates a better feeling in the moment. The other creates a stronger woman over time. And in 2026, the difference between those 2 women will become even more obvious. Because the women who become financially powerful will not always be the ones doing the most visible things. They will often be the ones practicing the quietest habits. The habits nobody glamorizes. The habits that do not look impressive at first. The habits that feel almost too boring to matter. But they do matter. Because those boring habits are often the exact line between a woman who keeps earning and a woman who actually keeps what she earns. So let us get into the 10 boring habits that make that difference. Habit 1. She knows her real number first. Woman checks her account emotionally. She opens her banking app, looks at the balance, feels either temporary relief or temporary stress, then closes it. If the number does not look too bad, she tells herself, I think I'm doing okay. And that phrase sounds harmless, but it hides a problem. Because I think is not a financial system, it is a feeling. Now, the second woman may not look more glamorous. She may not even earn more. But she knows something the first woman does not. She knows what comes in. She knows what automatically goes out. She knows what her fixed costs actually are. And she knows how much margin she really has after all of it. Not guessed, not assumed, known. And that changes everything. Because serious money starts when guessing ends. A lot of people are not financially behind because they earn too little. They are behind because their money is living in fog. They do not really know what their life costs to maintain. They do not know how much of their spending is fixed, how much is flexible, and how much is leaking quietly in the background. So they keep making decisions from emotion instead of structure. And fog is expensive. Fog makes you think you have more room than you do. Fog makes you delay changes you should have made months ago. Fog makes small leaks look harmless until they become your normal. And the most dangerous part is, fog feels peaceful in the short term. Because clarity can be uncomfortable at first. But clarity is the beginning of power. Because the woman who knows her real number is harder to manipulate, harder to panic, and harder to impress into overspending. She is no longer reacting to her money. She is reading it. Habit 2, she automates boring wins. One woman saves when she feels disciplined, when she has had a good month, when she feels in control, when nothing unexpected has happened, when she is in the mood to be responsible, and when all of that lines up, she moves money. But the problem is not her intention. The problem is that her future is now dependent on her feelings staying consistent, and feelings are not stable systems. Now the other woman does something less impressive. She removes discipline from the equation. She does not rely on motivation. She does not wait to feel ready. She does not trust her future to the version of her that might be tired, emotional, or distracted next month. She decides once, and then she lets the system carry the decision forward, automatically, quietly, without needing her to show up perfectly every time. Automation is boring. There is no excitement, no moment where it feels like you just made a powerful move, no emotional reward. And that is exactly why it works, because it protects your future from your moods. It removes the constant negotiation between what you should do and what you feel like doing. And over time, that gap matters more than people think. Fidelity reported that the total average 401 savings rate was around 42% in third quarter 2025, very close to its long-suggested 15% target. Not because people suddenly became perfect with money, but because systems quietly carried behavior forward without needing constant emotional effort. And that is the shift. Automation is not about being organized. It is about refusing to renegotiate your future every single month. Because the more often you renegotiate, the more likely you are to compromise. And the woman who stops negotiating with herself is the woman whose money starts moving without resistance. Habit 3. She keeps her fixed costs boring. One woman keeps chasing upgrades. A slightly better apartment, a nicer car, a softer routine, a more elevated version of everyday life. And none of those things look reckless. That is what makes them dangerous. Because the other woman is not necessarily less ambitious. She just protects something different. She protects flexibility. She understands that the most dangerous expenses are not always random splurges. They are recurring obligations that start to feel normal. A rent payment that is just a little too high. A car note that looked manageable at the time. A lifestyle that quietly assumes next month's income before it even arrives. That is where pressure hides. Not always in one dramatic mistake, but in the monthly commitments that slowly remove your room to breathe. And the problem with fixed costs is that once they become normal, they stop feeling expensive. They just start feeling like life. So a woman can be earning more, living better, looking more polished, and still becoming more financially fragile underneath it all. Because every upgrade has a hidden question attached to it. So of that life better? Or does it make my life more expensive to maintain? Those are not always the same thing. The fastest way to feel rich is not always to earn more. Sometimes it is to stop building a life that requires constant performance. Because a woman with high fixed costs can look successful for a very long time, until one disruption reveals the truth. She was never financially relaxed. She was financially maintained. Habit 4. She builds cash before she builds image. One woman invests in being perceived as stable. The other invests in actually being stable. And those are two very different lives. Because stability that can be seen is often about appearance. A well-designed home. A polished routine. A certain kind of presentation. A life that signals, I'm fine. But real stability is much less photogenic. It often looks like money sitting quietly in an account. Doing nothing. Waiting. And that is exactly why so many people underestimate it. Cash reserves are boring because nobody claps for them. No one sees them. No one compliments them. They do not make a woman feel glamorous in the moment. Until life happens. Until something slows down. Until work changes. Until an emergency shows up. Until a bill arrives during a season when your energy is already low. Then suddenly, cash stops looking boring. It starts looking like dignity. Bankrate reported that 24% of Americans had no emergency savings at all in 2025, and only 46% had enough to cover 3 months of expenses. That means the habit of quietly building cash is still rarer than people think. And that matters because savings is not just money. It is emotional breathing room. It is the space between an inconvenience and a crisis. It is the difference between reacting in fear and responding with clarity. And emotional breathing room changes the kind of decisions a woman is able to make. Because when you are not suffocating financially, you stop choosing from panic. You start choosing from power. Habit 5. She does not use spending as self-repair. One woman buys after hard days. Not because she is foolish, not because she lacks standards, not because she does not understand money, but because something in her wants relief. So she buys something small, something pretty, something convenient, something that makes the day feel less heavy. And the purchase is not always about the item. Sometimes it is about regulation. The other woman still feels the urge. She still has hard days. She still wants softness. She still wants relief. But she notices the urge without building a life around it. And that difference matters more than people realize. Because not all overspending is greed. Sometimes it is exhaustion. Sometimes it is reward. Sometimes it is identity grief. Sometimes it is the need to feel progress when life feels slow. Sometimes it is the quiet emotional hunger to feel cared for when life has asked too much of you. That is why this is not about blame. A lot of women are not spending because they are shallow. They are spending because money became a coping language, a way to soothe, a way to celebrate, a way to fill a gap that has nothing to do with the price tag. And when spending becomes emotional recovery, it becomes very hard to question, because it no longer feels like consumption. It feels like comfort. But there is a cost to that pattern. If spending is how you recover from life, wealth will always feel emotionally expensive. Because every time life gets hard, your future becomes the thing that pays for your relief. Habit 6. She waits before she wants. One woman reacts fast. She sees something, feels something, wants something, and moves quickly. Not always because she is careless. Sometimes because the feeling is strong. Sometimes because the moment feels clear. Sometimes because the desire feels so immediate that slowing down almost feels unnecessary. But the other woman does something less exciting. She creates distance, not forever, just enough. Enough space for emotion to settle. Enough time for urgency to lose its costume. Enough pause for truth to show up. And that sounds painfully boring. That is exactly why it works. Because a waiting period does something most people underestimate. It filters fantasy from value. In the first few hours, a purchase can feel meaningful, necessary, identity-enhancing, even healing. But urgency distorts desire. It makes things feel more important than they are. More aligned than they are, more life-improving than they often turn out to be. Time reveals truth. Time lets you see whether you wanted the thing, or just the feeling, attached to the thing. And that is a powerful distinction. Because many purchases are not wrong. They are just emotionally louder in the first 24 hours than they are useful in the next 24 months. That is why delay matters. Not because waiting makes you virtuous. Not because wanting something is a flaw. But because delay is a financial intelligence skill, not a personality flaw. The woman who can pause is not depriving herself. She is protecting herself from temporary emotion disguised as permanent value. Habit 7. She treats debt like convenience carefully. One woman hears, "It's only 4 payments." And that sentence feels harmless, small, manageable, almost too light to question. But the other woman hears something else. She hears, "I just used tomorrow's peace to pay for today's feeling." And that difference in interpretation changes everything. Because the danger of modern payment systems is not just debt. It is how harmless they feel, how frictionless they feel, how emotionally invisible they feel, how easily they let a woman separate the pleasure of buying from the weight of paying. That is what makes them seductive. Not because they look reckless, because they do not. The CFPB reported in January 2025 that 21.2% of consumers with a credit record financed at least one purchase with a buy now, pay later loan, and its research also highlighted heavier usage patterns, including consumers taking on multiple pay-in-4 loans. And that matters because once spending stops feeling heavy, people stop treating it with the seriousness it deserves. That is the trap, not always the amount. The emotional softness of the transaction. Anything that makes spending feel lighter than it really is should be handled with suspicion. Not fear, suspicion. Because the financially powerful woman is not the one who panics around every modern convenience. She is the one who understands that convenience can quietly numb judgment. And anything that numbs judgment around money deserves distance. Habit 8. She increases her gap. Not just her income. One woman celebrates raises by upgrading life. A nicer place, better routines, higher standards, more comfort, more speed, more polish. And on the surface that makes sense. If you earn more, your life should reflect it. But the other woman does something much less visible. She widens the gap between what she earns and what she needs. And that gap is where power begins, because income matters. Of course it matters. But margin changes everything. Margin is what turns earnings into breathing room. Margin is what turns work into choice. Margin is what allows money to become stability instead of just motion. And if every increase in income gets absorbed by a faster life, a prettier life, a more expensive life, then growth never becomes power. It just becomes maintenance at a higher level. That is why 2 women can earn the same amount and feel completely different inside their lives. One feels stretched, the other feels supported. Not because one is more worthy, but because one protected the gap. A raise does not change your life when your lifestyle reaches it first. And this is the part many people do not realize until much later. This is why some high earners still feel trapped. Their income grew, but their room to breathe did not. So from the outside it looks like success, but on the inside it still feels like pressure wearing better clothes. Habit 9. She invests consistently. Even when it feels unexciting, one woman waits to feel ready. She tells herself she will start when she understands more, when she has more money, when life feels less unpredictable, when the amount feels meaningful enough to matter, and that logic feels responsible. But the other woman starts while it still feels small, before it feels impressive, before it feels identity-changing, before there is any visible proof that it is working. And that matters because compounding is deeply unfair in appearance. At first, it looks like nothing is happening. The numbers move slowly. The results feel small. The effort looks unimpressive. The sacrifice does not seem dramatic enough to change a life. So from the outside, consistency can look almost foolish in the beginning. Then one day, the same pattern people ignored starts looking extraordinary. And suddenly it looks like someone got lucky. But it was not luck. It was repetition surviving long enough to be seen. Fidelity's Q3 2025 retirement analysis reported that women who had saved in a 401k continuously for 15 years had reached an average balance of $500 and $1,100 mark for the first time. That is what boring consistency can become over time. And that is the part many people never stay around long enough to witness, because the early years of wealth building are often visually disappointing. There is not enough evidence yet to excite you, not enough proof yet to impress you, not enough visible reward yet to make you feel transformed. And that is why so many people quit before numbers become identity-changing. They leave in the quiet phase, right before consistency becomes power. Habit 10, she chooses peace over performance. One woman wants her money to prove something, that she is doing well, that she is elevated, that she is no longer the version of herself who had to struggle, that her life is beautiful enough, polished enough, expensive enough to be respected. The other woman wants her money to protect something, her peace, her freedom, her nervous system, her ability to make decisions without fear, her ability to move through life without constantly performing stability she does not yet feel. And this may be the most boring habit of all. She stops performing wealth. She stops buying to keep up with an imagined standard, stops forcing her life to look expensive before it feels safe, stops treating appearances like evidence of security, because she understands something deeper. Money that exists to impress the room usually leaves the room with the room. But money that protects your peace stays useful long after the moment passes. And this shift matters in a decade where women are expected to control roughly 2/3 of U.S. private wealth by 2030, with holdings projected to reach about $34 trillion by the end of the decade. So the question is not whether women will touch more money. The question is whether they will keep it, direct it, and use it from a place of clarity. Because a woman becomes powerful when her money no longer exists to impress the room. That is when money stops being costume and starts becoming protection. So when you step back and look at all 10 habits together, here is the hidden pattern. None of these habits are sexy. None of them are the kind people post about dramatically. None of them feel exciting enough to announce. None of them feel like a breakthrough on a random Tuesday afternoon. There is nothing flashy about knowing your real number. Nothing glamorous about automating transfers. Nothing thrilling about keeping fixed costs low. Nothing emotionally loud about building cash quietly. Nothing instantly rewarding about pausing before you buy, delaying desire, or refusing to let convenience make your future more expensive. That is exactly why so many women underestimate these habits. Because they are looking for a feeling, a dramatic shift, a visible moment, a clean emotional payoff that says something big just changed. But that is not usually how wealth enters a woman's life. It enters more quietly than that, through structure, through restraint, through repetition, through decisions that feel small in the moment, but radically change what her life can hold over time. And together, these habits do something profound. They make a woman less reactive. She stops responding to every emotion with money. They make her less fragile. Life can hit her without instantly knocking her off center. They make her less easy to pressure. She is harder to manipulate with urgency, status, trends, and appearances. They make her less dependent on what things look like from the outside. She no longer needs the performance of stability to feel valuable. And in exchange, they make her more patient, more solvent, more grounded, more strategic, more dangerous in the long run. Because this is why boring habits make serious money. Not because boring is special on its own, but because serious money is not built by emotional intensity. It is built by emotional regulation repeated long enough. That is the real pattern, not excitement, not mood, not temporary motivation, regulation. A woman who can regulate herself around money can keep more of what she earns, protect more of what she builds, and stay in the game long enough for her choices to compound. And that is where the real transformation begins. Maybe the most expensive lie women have been sold is this: that financial power should look exciting while it is being built, that it should feel dramatic, visible, impressive, easy to recognize from the outside. But often, the women building the strongest financial future look very ordinary in the middle of the process. There is no dramatic flex, no constant upgrade, no loud proof that something extraordinary is happening. Just structure, restraint, repetition, peace. And that is not boring in a sad way. That is boring in a powerful way. Because one woman spends money to feel like her future is safe. Another woman builds habits so her future actually is. And that difference may not look impressive this week. It may not feel glamorous this month. It may not even be understood by the people watching from the outside. But over time, it becomes visible in a way that cannot be faked. In her calm, in her choices, in what she can walk away from, in what no longer controls her, in how little she needs to perform to feel secure, because the wealthy woman is not always the one living the loudest. Sometimes, she is the one doing the quietest things so consistently that one day, her life no longer shakes.